Hello, everyone. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
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 Thank you for joining.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Olga. Nice to see you.
Hi.
A lot of people. We are expecting a lot of people because we had we reached the number of 100 for the registrations. And that's why we were waiting for a few minutes before starting. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. We will try to make the webinar as interactive as it is possible, as the technology will allow us. A few technical rules for you. Please try to keep your microphones muted. Well, I will actually change the settings so you will not be able to unmute yourself during the presentation, just in case. We will be having the presentation on my screen shared with you all so you can follow it. And then we're going to use a Mentimeter platform where you will be posting your questions. So all these details you will see now. And besides that, I also want to let you all know that we will be recording the webinar because we received a lot of interest from people that they want to follow it, but unfortunately we had limited number of registrations. So we will be recording it and then posting it online so people can follow it later. I think we are good to start. Just a more moment. Okay, I think we're gonna start now, and then until all the other people will join. Okay. One more moment. Okay, so I think we're good to start now. All the participants from the waiting room are in. So thank you once again for joining us. For all the participants, if you want to, you are free to turn off your cameras or no, as you would like. Welcome to our webinar on the European universities and student engagement in the European universities. I'm Gohar Hovhannisyan. I'm the Vice President of the European Students' Union, and in general, the webinar is hosted by the European Students' Union. And we are happy to see so much of interest from you all to join us. So during the webinar, we have, of course, our speakers. So Elena Tegovska, from Director General of Education and Culture of the European Commission, is joining us. Then Nina de Weinter, who is an executive committee member from the European Students' Union. Daniela Trani from YUFE Alliance, and Anthony Longo, again from YUFE Alliance. And we also have Morgan Bukart, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, from Una Europa Alliance. And our speakers will be sharing with us the experience they had so far connected to student engagement and the European universities. But of course, besides our speakers, we also very much want to know our participants. So we want to understand what are the groups of our participants that we have now in the webinar. Therefore, I'm asking you to go to menti.com, and now you see my presentation on the screen from Mentimeter. So please identify yourself, whether you are a student or you are from a university or any other institution that you just got interested and decided to join our webinar. This will help us to understand how the interest about student engagement is kind of divided between different stakeholders. And I will give just like a very little time for you to identify yourself. We have in total 60 participants now, so we should have, yeah, we are still at the half. Okay, it seems we have majority students so far. That's great. And you can continue identifying yourself. This will be very helpful for us, and we will look at it in a bit. And meanwhile, I will go back and take you to the program of our webinar for today. So we will have a short introduction I will do for you about ESU and why did we decide to do this webinar in general. Then we will move to the information from the Commission, where Elena will lead us into why student involvement is crucial from their side. Then we will discuss what do students need in general in order to be involved in the European universities. Then we will be talking about the YUFE Alliance and their experience of student-centered and inclusive European university. And then we will move to Una Europa, where Morgan will show us the path of students in the Alliance and how did they manage to get there as student representatives. As I mentioned, we will be having a Q&A part. So in order for us to collect your questions throughout the webinar, you're very welcome to go to Mentimeter again. And now I will be changing the slide. So this slide about questions will be running throughout the whole presentation. You will be sometimes getting reminders for the link and the code of the presentation, and you're very welcome to post your questions there whenever you will have them. Please just mention to whom your question is directed when you are typing it. So later during the Q&A part, we will know who from the speakers should answer to your questions. And now we move back. And we start with the main content. So what is ESU? Because I believe not very many of you might be familiar to the work that the European Students' Union is doing. So European Students' Union is the umbrella organization for 46 national unions of students from around 40 countries. We represent and promote the rights of students, and we work with many different institutions who do any certain work on topic of higher education, including with the European Union, with the Bologna follow-up group that follows the Bologna process, with the Council of Europe, UNESCO, UN, and in total we represent around 20 million students through all our members from the national student unions. Then briefly telling you what ESU has been doing so far on the topic of European universities and to explain why did we organize this webinar. So from the very beginning, when the European University Initiative started, ESU was very actively involved in different European level consultations. We have issued several resolutions, which later you will be able to access through the presentation because it will be sent to all the participants. So we issued 3 different resolutions so far. We are always present at different high-level events and discussions that are about European universities. We have organized the first student meeting for the European universities when on the 7th of November last year, there was the big kickoff meeting of European University Alliances. We held this student meeting and brought the students from different alliances together. We're also part of a project called eUnique, which is looking into the quality assurance of European universities and making sure that this new initiative that is now growing in Europe has also a proper quality assurance. And we are making sure that students are part of these quality assurance processes. Besides that, we cooperate a lot with colleagues from Directorate General of Education and who are also part of our webinar today. We cooperate with many different European university alliances, such as YUFE and Una Europa, which are again part of our webinar. We have an informal platform created for students from the European University Alliances, and you will receive a bit more information about this from Nina later. And we do much more, really, like we do many different actions on this topic. And particularly, we realized that it is important for us to organize this webinar because we see that we at the European level, as the European Students' Union, receive a lot of information, both from the decision makers and also from the side of the university alliances about the implementation and how the university alliances are growing. However, we see that there is a vacuum between students or staff who are far from Brussels and don't really have sometimes access to information and to practices that now exist within the European University Alliances. And that's exactly the reason why we decided to do this webinar and invited all our speakers here. And I'm very thankful to all of them for joining. And I'm happy now to pass on the floor to Elena from the Director General of Education. Meanwhile, please don't forget to check and post your questions on Mentimeter. And now I'm happy to pass the floor to Elena, who will be leading us through her presentation.
Thank you very much, Gohar. Thank you for giving us the opportunity and for organizing this webinar to discuss student involvement and how we can go one step further maybe than what is currently being done. So before entering really or replying to the question, which is why student involvement crucial, and I think that all the participants in this webinar would agree that student involvement is indeed a very important one. Let me just remind you what this initiative is about. And as you will see from the next slide, basically the idea is that all together we support and we facilitate for universities to achieve this deep level of cooperation that will be based on a joint and shared long-term strategy covering education, research, innovation, and service to society. And the ultimate objective there is really to have a structural impact. So it means an impact on how today universities are organizing their teaching and learning, how they are organizing their mobility, how they are organizing their recognition processes, and so on. But also to have an impact at a higher level. So systemic, by systemic we mean really the European higher education area, and sustainable as well, which means that we go beyond the funding period of the European universities, that is for today 3 years. Yes, do you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you. Yeah, yeah. Just go on. We can.
I thought there was a question. Okay. And indeed, the idea is to achieve this sustainable impact. And if we are serious about these objectives, and I think we all are, we cannot imagine achieving them without having a real strong and structured student involvement within the European alliances. Indeed, here the idea is to go beyond this concept of project. The European universities are not a project, it's really a long-term cooperation between universities, and we see students as a key element in making this initiative a success. So to give concrete examples with the next slide, on how we want to achieve this, and it is by creating these European inter-university campuses. And there, within each of these 3 strands, everything is about, at the end of the day, about the students. So when we are talking about flexible and personalized European curricula, we are talking about shifting the mentalities and shifting the paradigm into putting in place a much more student-centered learning and teaching within the European universities. And here again, if we want to get the most out of this new way, an innovative way of teaching and learning, students have to be on board from the very beginning. And they have to be consulted, their voice has to be heard. When we talk about putting in place a challenge-based approach and using innovative pedagogies, this is again at the benefit of the students. The challenge-based approach, it is this idea of empowering students and not only being passive listeners within a class, but being active participants also of their curricula, but of as well the participation in this challenge-based approach, which means that ideally we would have teams of researchers, professors, students, but as well civil society organizations, enterprises, working on specific topics that tackle today and tomorrow main societal challenges. And the ultimate goal is really to equip students with forward-looking skills that will indeed enable them of becoming empowered citizens, not only of Europe, but world citizens. And you will see on the next slide that the lessons that we have learned, so as you all know, we are currently in the second pilot call. We have selected 17 alliances from the first one. And by talking with the experts that have selected and analyzed and evaluated the applications in the first call, we have extracted a few elements that were a sort of make or break thing for an alliance to get the funding. And you see there are not many of them. There are 6. You can see them on this slide. I will not go through all of them, but I would point out that one of the main elements in the success of an alliance was the extent to which students were involved from the very beginning, but also their plans in making students' involvements also throughout the implementation of the activities of that specific alliance. And in this respect, we have in the application form a specific question where we ask alliances, how are you going to tackle students' involvement? How are you involving your students? Have you already involved them? And what are your concrete plans in involving them in the future? And here we are not talking, it's not a buzzword for us, student involvement. It's not a a box that has to be ticked. We really want to see structured involvement in students. Of course, how they are being involved, this is up to each alliance to agree upon. There is no one fit for all model at European level, and we don't want to impose one because we are in the pilot call. We are testing different models of cooperation, different models as well of involving the students. So it is totally up to the universities. But the bottom line from our side is that we really want to see a structured involvement of students in each of these alliances. And indeed, and here I will not repeat what Gohar has said, and this is my final or my next slide. We have involved the students in this process from the very beginning. As you know, this initiative, even if it has come a little bit from a top-down approach, in that sense that it came through council conclusions, from the Macron speech, etc. So if we look at it from that perspective, it is a top-down approach, but we have really insisted of defining and developing the concept through a bottom-up approach, which means co-creation. And this is why we have strongly, closely involved students, not only ESU, the European Student Union, but also the Erasmus Students Network, to make sure that what we are developing along the way does correspond to their needs and is relevant for them. So we have continued involving them through making their voice heard in these videos, and they will be published very soon on our website. We have short video capsules where students talk about their alliances. And here we really made the point of honor of having students talk about their alliances and not universities. And as Gohar has mentioned, they had also their first, I would say, formal or official meeting between the students at the occasion of the high-level kickoff event on the 7th of November. So what I would say to conclude is that we have really succeeded all together, also with the universities and with the students, to create this sense of ownership for the students, where they feel that this initiative is not only made for them, but it is also made by them. And we strongly encourage the European universities to build on this ownership and continue involving the students within their alliances. So in this respect, I'm very happy to see that, that today in the webinar we have YUFE and Una Europa, which are one of the alliances who are up until now being most active in involving students in a structured way. And I really invite them also to continue sharing their good practices, not only with the rest of the alliances, but also with the rest of the higher education institutions in Europe. And just a final point, because I didn't mention it, I think, during my presentation, is that, of course, the extent to which students are involved in the alliances was not only a success factor when we were talking about selecting an alliance to be funded for the European University, with the European Universities Initiative, and to become a European university, but it will also be a factor through the monitoring process that we are currently setting up. The extent to which students will be involved in the alliances will be one of the indicators that will be used in the monitoring and evaluation process on the implementation side of the alliances. And I will stop here, but of course, very happy to address any comments or questions you might have. And thanks again for this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Elena, for your presentation and for all the important remarks that you made about student participation in the European universities. I'll just take a chance to quickly remind you all that you can go to Mentimeter, and with the code 55, 10, and 41, you can post your questions. A quick remark to the question about the presentation. Yes, we will be sending the presentation to all the registered participants after the webinar. And also, as I mentioned, the webinar itself will be online, uploaded in YouTube and shared on our channels and sent to you, so you can access it and especially share it later with your colleagues and friends or whoever will be interested. So now I will pass the floor to Nina so that she will speak about ESU's perspective.
Yes, thank you, Gohar. So I will follow up on what the Commission has mentioned a lot, the importance of student involvement in the networks and in the alliances, and then not only on the Commission level where ESU and ESN have been involved, but more importantly, of course, on the level of the alliances. So if you want to go to the next slides. As ESU, from the beginning, we've really been thinking about, okay, but how should students be involved and what is important to them? Then first of all, it's important to highlight that there's involvement actually in two phases for the students. First, in the creation of the alliance, the whole process of preparing, bringing the universities together, thinking of what you want your alliance to look like, what's the strategy you're gonna have, your vision, your mission, etc. And there already from the beginning, students should be involved, and it's super important that also the students have an important say in what the alliance is gonna focus on and what it's gonna look like, because the Commission also said it's more or less a bottom-up approach. Most of the time the alliances are formed on a strategic level, but then how to bring this in the end into a successful alliance where programs are student centers, where students are involved, then you have to have the student involvement all the way from the beginning. And of course, for the alliances that have now already been granted the money or have handed in their project proposals, they are in the second phase, and that's the phase of the project where the alliance will be developed, where you will start implementing all the steps and what you've created in a project proposal. And this is also where, as ESU, we see that here you will always also start working towards official representation of students. And how you exactly do that, you can do that in multiple ways. And of course, we will also hear later some good practices on how that's done, and hear from them how they organize this in their alliance. But we do say, like, okay, so then you start implementing your project proposal, and that's also where you start working towards official governmental structures where students should definitely have a place. So then we go to the next slide. In terms of how to organize student involvement, there's two very, very important things. First of all, it's in the official decision-making bodies. So students should officially be involved and have a say in the different phases of the project. And ideally, this is a democratically elected body of students somewhere in the governmental structure of the alliance, with student representatives from all the different universities that are in the alliance. But how exactly you structure this can be done in many ways. And also, for example, students can have a seat or a say in other kind of decision-making bodies. It's just how you organize your governmental structure within the alliance. But this will also be further elaborated upon by the alliances that will speak after. But ideally, it's with the students from all the different universities, and somehow that's so well organized that there is some kind of like democratic representation. And then the other very important part is the involvement in the creation of the learning. as the Commission also already mentioned, the alliances are about students. It's even the name of the webinar, right? So what's basically what we're saying is, if you really want to create this student-centeredness and student-centered learning paths, then students should definitely be involved from the beginning by how the program should look like, what should be the focus, what should be the learning outcomes, what should be the learning path, should it be flexible, should it include e-learning, etc., etc. How do we make sure that there's this intercultural connectedness and real internationalization with real mobility, and this should all be done in cooperation with the students. So this is basically the official decision making, but also, of course, in the creation of the learning processes. And then in this whole process, there are three very important determining factors for the success of the student involvement. And the first of all is the information provision. We have heard some stories where the information to the students that were involved was not complete, not from the beginning. And students, of course, it's sometimes more difficult for students to have a long-term involvement, because the student representation changes normally yearly or every 2 years. And as already mentioned before, it's mostly strategic decisions made in the beginning on a higher strategical level. But it's very important that students have all the information necessary to make a good decision in the official involvement, and also to be fully involved in the creation of the learning processes. And so the second one is already mentioned before, but it's the involvement in official decision making. Only with an official say you have the students fairly represented. And the third thing, it's a very fair point, I think, to say students should also have sufficient resources in order to do their work right. And that doesn't necessarily, of course, have to be in terms of money, but it's in terms of time they can invest in improving the net, thinking about the alliance, etc., etc. But also think of maybe granting them ECTS. Now, I'm not so much talking to the students, but also to the other representatives here in the webinar. But of course, also for the students, if you need this time, if you need these resources, please be open about it, because it's the way to be fully involved, and it's the way to create these alliances in a way that we all benefit from it, and that especially the students benefit from it. So that's the three kind of important factors I also wanted to mention here. And then the last thing, what is the role of ESO in this? So of course we're involved on the more on the European level, and with the Commission we discuss what's happening in the alliances, but also we try to really build a platform for all the students involved in the different networks. So they can share information, we can share information with you, we can help each other. And that we do now via the official Facebook page, and we will send you also the link later when we send the presentation. So join please and share all your experiences, and we'll also keep you up to date via that on the latest developments. And we can help you on a more individual level to help you with this, how you organize your student involvement, basically offer training possibilities, or can connect you to other networks that can help you. And then there's the point that was also made by the Commission. We've already organized one student meeting on the 7th of November, and we are really planning to bring together the students at all the possible occasions. So that's from my side.
Thank you very much, Nina. Again, another reminder about Mentimeter questions. And I also want to remind you that on Mentimeter, you can see all the other questions that are being posted by the other participants. And you can also, click on like those which you find the most relevant, so that they will be addressed. But I hope that we will be able to cover in general all the questions that you are posting there. And just a quick remark to what Nina was saying about the involvement of students within the learning that is being created in the European universities. yeah, we really hope that the students themselves will be proactive in demanding this type of involvement, but also we're calling upon the universities to ensure this involvement, and particularly now in this situation when we are all moving to e-learning because we have to due to external circumstances. Some people feel really, some students feel really distant from their learning just because most of their student life is connected to a building rather than really to a content. So this is something very important for the universities to reflect upon, and for the students to point out to the universities and highlight the importance of their own engagement in the creation of the learning process. And now I'm happy to pass the floor to Daniela and Anthony from YUFE Alliance, the Young European Universities for the Future of Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gohar and Nina. Thanks to ESU for providing us the opportunity to share our experience regarding student involvement with all the participants. And first of all, I want to say that I'm glad to see so many colleagues and students joining us today. And right now, our main concern for students and staff is that they are healthy, and our wish as YUFE is that you all stay healthy and safe at this difficult time. This is also something that we have felt very much lately when we were working on our project, on the implementation. And as you, Elena and Nina have said, Gohar, the student-centered profile of European universities is essential also to respond to emergencies, to readjust in situations like the one we are going through now, because we need to listen to the students, to the youth, to understand how we can best build a relevant, resilient European higher education for now and for the future. So our Young Universities for the Future of Europe has as key characteristics being student-centered, open, inclusive, and non-elitist. It's an alliance that counts 14 partners, 10 partner universities from 10 different countries, and 4 non-academic organizations. Diversity is crucial for us because our vision is to build the first European university that will provide the students with a quadruple helix ecosystem. So an ecosystem where students are trained, you can go to the next slide, please, are trained not only within and inside the university walls, but they are trained in a landscape that brings together universities, public and private sectors, and citizens. So we have, since the beginning, tried to bring together all these elements. The students at the very core of the development of our concept. And we have worked together as university staff, executives, together with our colleagues from the other sectors. And ESU has been a very valuable partner in providing us their perspective as to how we, not only as European University Initiative, but also with other alliances, can contribute, can cooperate to make this initiative stronger. So above all, we put students and their interest. One key consideration that I would like to share with you is that if we base a challenge-based approach on cooperation rather than competition, then we will be able to shape trained professionals that, like it happens now, from different corners, from different fields, from different areas in Europe and in the world, are able to address an emergency of unprecedented size. So this approach is not only what we want to pursue to profile ourselves, but because we believe that this is one of the best possible ways to train resilient and versatile professionals and citizens. This has been reflected since the beginning in our governance. So the ideas that have been put in our proposal don't come from the staff and the strategy, not only, but have been conceived together with our students. So Anthony has been, from the very beginning, involved in the process, together with many other student members. So we don't call our students representatives because they're really members. They are partners and colleagues in this process since day one. And for us, it was not even a question whether they should be involved and how many they should be. We just thought we need to have as many bright, driven minds and individuals possible to build what we would consider a bold dream. So in the development phase, we came together with a core working group that was made of staff and students and executives. And the way we have experienced the process is that it has been bottom up with the students in the center, but top down support from the highest level, the highest management level of our universities. And it continues to be true also now. So the present governance that was already in the greatest part established during the development phase sees at the center the YUFE Strategy Board, chaired by one of the highest executives of our universities. Currently is Professor Martin Paul, president of Maastricht University, and is co-chaired by Anthony Longo, who is also the president of the YUFE Student Forum. What I want to emphasize is that the elements that Nina brought in the discussion also have come back or have been present in our conversations, in our discussions since the beginning, including the need to have the students not only give an opinion, but be integral part of the decision-making process. So our student members have full voting powers in the strategy board, not only co-chair it, but also have a weight. The student forum has started to operate already during the development phase, but very interesting discussions are taking place now. What I can have given you is a bit of the management perspective and the strategic perspective, but the very interesting part will come now that I will give the word to Anthony. So Anthony, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniela, for the wonderful introduction. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Ezu and especially Gohar and Nina for organizing this webinar. I think this is a very needed discussion to have on student engagement, and it's already a pleasure to be speaking to you. Now, as Daniela said, I will share with you an overview of the way in which students have been involved in the YUFE Alliance from the beginning until now. A summary of that you can see on the slide that is projected, but let me start maybe by going back, I think almost 2 years, approaching the summer of 2018. I was invited by my university as president of the student council there to attend a working group meeting of this new project called YUFE. And from then on already, students were working together with staff in the earliest brainstorm sessions and development of ideas of what YUFE could mean as a European university. And then at a certain point, we installed different working groups that would eventually transform into the working packages in the proposal. And for all these working groups, we decided that the co-chair was always a student. So this allowed us, I think, to guarantee that the student DNA, as we call it, was continuously being imprinted in the process and in the content of the proposal. Now, once we have heard the wonderful news of the European Commission that we were selected for funding. The governance structure, as Daniela showed before, was implemented, of course, and from that point, all working packages contained at least 2 students from different universities. And besides that, 2 students, as Daniela said, the president and vice president of the student forum as voting members on the strategy board. And on top of that, since October, we have a running student forum contained of 3 students per university and a student forum board that ensures the daily management of student participation in the Alliance. Now, until now, as student forum, we have mainly been developing a long-term vision of student involvement within the Alliance, which has been quite a challenge. And in this attempt, we found ourselves detecting some challenges indeed, but also some opportunities, of which I think will be relevant for all European universities. So I hope to inspire you with these sharings of mine. Let me begin with the first. As you can see on the slide, from the very beginning, we have been asking ourselves, well, what exactly is now our role, our purpose as students within the Alliance? And this is a question that we posed multiple times to the university staff, to the executives, to directors, also to Daniela as managing director very often. But at a certain point, we realized that we needed to stop searching and start shaping our role. And I think that is a very important first insight, very characteristic of these European university alliances. That brings me to the second point. More recently, we have discussed ways in which we can engage students even more in the process. Sparring with all stakeholders, we are developing right now an alliance-wide approach to ensure cooperation between students and staff, but also guidance of student members. One way we try to solve this is by demarcating for each working package which points require specific expertise, specific input from the students and respectively from staff, but also by delivering some specific questions, for example, to the students before meetings so that they have the ability to reflect upon certain matters before the meetings. I think this shows how we envision student involvement not only as a valuable contribution in co-creating the project together with students, but also as a learning opportunity for students in the Alliance. The third challenge for us was the composition of the student forum. We started, as Daniela mentioned, in the Alliance with a very bottom-up approach on the involvement of students from all universities, which meant that universities were independently would decide their procedure of involving students. And right now we are trying to reach a uniform approach whilst keeping also the pool as diverse as possible, which is of course very important in this context. Brings me to the fourth point, which concerns, as you can see, the question of what kind of student involvement do we need and do we want. And it was very important from the beginning for students, but also for staff, that student participation was never limited to passive contributions or to a forum as mere soundboard for ideas. And in this vein, we try not to speak indeed of student participation or student representatives, but of co-creation, co-creators without any distinction between staff and students. I will end this slide with a very open question. What after the pilot phase? Indeed, I think this might be the toughest challenge for us all, since it is very hard to envision how things will go, to be honest. And I guess I want you to take this as a message that it is important to keep an open mind at all times in developing your European university project, including the role of students within it. So let's not maybe set things in stone that will float away eventually. Now, I would like to end my contribution with a picture. So if you could go to the next slide, thank you. This picture was taken at the University of Cyprus in October, where the Student Forum Board was elected for the very first time. And I think this picture perfectly shows what kind of European university we want to build with YUFE. And I hope you would agree for your universities that we want to create a community, a family of academics, if you will, in which everyone is a partner and in which students are as much heard as any staff member. So I will end here. I hope this gave you a good overview, of how we have been dealing with student engagement within YUFE, which challenges arose and how we tackle them. But of course, I would be happy to dive into them more deeply based on your questions. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, both to Daniela and Anthony for sharing, and like sharing particularly inspiration for others to really get students on board. And as far as I remember, the discussions about European universities, YUFE was one of the really great examples about student engagement. So thank you very much for being for taking a flagship on this, not only about being like a great European university, but also about being great with involving students in the alliance that you are creating. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure we will have a chance to address the questions that come from you from Mentimeter. I'm following, and we have plenty of questions already on the floor. So looking forward to the Q&A. And meanwhile, I will pass the floor to Morgan from Una Europa Alliance. And the reason why we decided to have these two different European University alliances in this webinar, I think will become very obvious after Morgan's presentation, because as far as we could understand from the perspective of the European Students' Union, there are some differences. And Morgan, the floor is yours to speak about the experience at Una Europa. Please, welcome.
Thank you very much, Gohar. Thank you very much also, Nina, and thank you everyone for attending this meeting. So just to talk about our experience of student representatives in what we call the student board of Una Europa. Let's just talk a little bit about Una Europa first. So Una Europa is the university alliance between 8 universities. You have the Freie Universität of Berlin in Germany, the Alma Mater Studiorum Università di Bologna in Italy, the Jagiellonian University of Cracovia in Poland, the University of Edinburgh in UK, the University of Helsinki in Finland, the KU Leuven in Belgium, the Universidad Complutense de Madrid in Spain, and the University Panthéon-Sorbonne in France, the university where I belong. And our university alliance is mostly based on promoting high-level research to provide our formation, our education programs in 4 specific pillars, which are the European studies, the cultural heritage, the sustainability, and artificial intelligence. So maybe you can skip to the next one. Thank you. So what do we have in Una Europa for student representation? We have a student board. The student board was created before we, as student representatives, arrived in the process. It was thought as like the student voice in the Una Europa project. It's composed by 8 members, 1 per university, and those 8 members they elect their chair and secretary. Their chair and the secretary of the board, who are the members of the project steering committee of One Europe. We had a lot of issues to deal with because we all come from different backgrounds. The first one was very practical. How we should work should we have 1-year terms, 2-year terms, because every university had very different length of terms. Some university elect their representative every 2 years, other every year, not in the same moment of the year also. So it was very difficult. So the first thing we faced was an organizational issue. Moreover, we also had to think about what we wanted to be. As I said, we come from very different backgrounds and we have very different visions of student representation, which means that we had to come everyone with our own ideas of what the student board should be, and make also a lot of concession with everyone's opinion to make something consensual. And we finally thought that the student board should be like the shield of the students in the UNE Europa project, to be sure that every decision made goes with the interest of the students. Let's take an example which is consensual in the student board. The UNE Europa will create several joint international formations, and we at the student board want to be sure that the tuition fees for those formation won't be higher than what the university nationally already proposed to their students, to be sure that everything that will be made in the UNE Europa Alliance will be fair for every student. And this question of affordability is the main topic led by the chair of our student board, Andrew Wilson from the University of Edinburgh. So you can go ahead next. Okay, thank you. So after this experience of the UNE Europa student board, I could say that the challenges we faced into advocating for student representation in our universities are the following ones. First is that, to be honest, the project is not completely launched for the students. I mean, it is launched. It was greatly launched in last January, but for example, the first international program will be set in September, normally, if the situation comes back to normal, will be set in September. So until September, it will be hard to interest the students in our university and also the other student representatives on those topics of UNE Europa, because it's not concrete for the moment. The great issue is how to create interest to people who have a lot of stuff to do into something who doesn't really exist for the moment. This is a main issue into advocating for student representation and involvement of students into the Alliance. The other challenge I think we faced is also a paradox. I would say more a double paradox. Let's take ESU. ESU, you have local student unions who are member of national student unions who are member of a European student union. With the student board and I guess all the student representation in the student university, you go directly to the local representation, to the European representation. You have like this going directly to this local step, to the international step, without facing more national and more general issues. And this creates another paradox. That's why I call this a double paradox. You have a European action, a European political action as student representatives, but which has only effects on a local level, which is very, very, very weird to figure out, to go out of what you do normally as a local representative, and you have to think another scale, a new scale who never was experimented before you. So this is main challenge we have to face into student involvement in the European Alliance. And the last one, which leads to the question of what are we as student representatives in the European Alliance, is the question of where should the student should the student representatives be into the different bodies of the alliance. For example, for the moment in the UNA Europa, the president and the secretary of the student board are just members of the project steering committee, which is the central body which coordinates every different project in UNA Europa. We're not, for example, like in YUFE member of the work package for the moment. It's we have a debate on that, but we also ask the question of how should we be members of the work package? If we are only 8 members of the student board, this also creates more work and for everyone. Can we do we have the time? Also, do we want to be members of those work packages? For example, if the decisions made in the work package don't go with the students' interest because of the discussions and the different actors into the work package, should we keep going with this one? So there are a lot of questions asked there. The question is, where should the students stand? Should they get deeply involved and go with the project, or should they be like pressure strength, just one step next to the project to be like the protector of the students' interest, and in fact not to provide solution for the students, but to demand solution for the students in the University Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan, for sharing your experience as well. Yeah, as I said, like to me, it seems that in case of UNA Europa, you as a student body had some more challenges to undergo through in order to shape a functioning student body within the Alliance. So thanks for sharing that. And there are plenty of questions waiting for us on Mentimeter. So thank you all for your presentations. And now we will go to the Q&A part. And for that, I'm opening the Mentimeter questions. So yeah, the first question about the slides, as I said, those will be sent to all the registered participants. And you can have it. Then let's look to the next question, which is to Elena. So how to ensure that students involved are legitimated to be there, because we have cases where rectors appointed students or administrative board selected the student representatives without a consent from the student council. Elena, I would ask you to, yes, if you can answer this question, which is pretty popular, it seems.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Yes, so thanks for the question. As I was pointing out, there is no single way of involving students. This is due to the fact that we are in a pilot call, we are testing different model of cooperation. So I would say that for each alliance, it is up to the universities that compose that alliance and to the students that are involved to find the best solution. In this specific case, I would say that if there is a discrepancy between what the student council has as approach in their regular proceedings, if it doesn't match with how the rectors have appointed the students to be part of the alliances, then I would say it's a question of dialogue between the students and the governing bodies in order to identify the best possible solution. So we really want to refrain ourselves from pointing out specific models to be followed, because we would then lose this testing of different models that is one of the objectives within the pilot phases. I saw that Daniela wanted to add something as well to this question.
Yes, thank you, Elena. I agree with the approach from the Commission, and what we have tried to do with the first students and colleagues and the executives that initiated the proposal is to really leave it to the students to define how we could achieve a harmonization, a uniform approach. So we have had students being appointed from the student council, like Anthony, who is the president in Antwerp. In other cases, we have had students reaching out to the staff and the executives that were working, because in our university is very well known what we're doing. So actually there is quite some enthusiasm. I would say a lot of enthusiasm from the students. And we have done this at two levels. So there are student members that are taking part to the student forum that counts now about 30 members. And there is a student forum board that is made of 5 members. So every university contributes to the student forum board with 3 representatives. But back home, we have sounding boards that involve more students, more staff, because we want to really generate a snowball. And it's not feasible to have at every meeting hundreds of attendees, but it is essential that in the implementation process, as it was during the development phase, we have to take on board as many voices as possible. So Anthony, I would like him also to spend a few words on this, because he can tell you also from the student perspective. From the management point of view, what we have asked our student forum is to propose how we could now, in the future, have a more harmonized approach. Yet, we want to, like Anthony said during his contribution, maintain diversity. So we want to ensure that the pool of students that are contributing to our implementation phase is as diverse as possible from any point of view. Anthony, I think you also can shed some light on the internal process that you're leading with your colleagues.
So I think that's a very relevant question. It's one of the questions we have been struggling with in the beginning of the student forum. So the context is that in our alliance, some universities indeed have a student council on a central level. Some universities only have a student council on faculty level, so not one, but multiple student councils. And there are just universities that have no student council at all, but maybe have students on the highest governance body, such as the board of directors, or just no student involvement as such. So this was quite a challenge for us to how to harmonize the student involvement. And at this point, we decided that there should not be a necessary link between the student selection procedure for the student forum and the local student councils, just to prevent any inequalities happening between the members of the student forum. But there is some space for the local context to, on local level, engage the student council or any student body in the local working groups. So that is where we are at now.
Thank you. Just to make a quick remark on this, because I also, at the European Students' Union, we have also seen this this issue of some student representatives being selected to be in the student body of the alliance. So I think this is the main issue of raising this type of question. And of course, we should be as open as possible in involving students in different bodies and different structures. But as also Nina mentioned in her presentation, making sure that democratically elected student representation is there is something that we very highly prioritize, and we think that the universities should also be called upon maintaining this for their own benefits as well. Exactly. Then I would propose to go to the next question, because we have a lot of them. So the next question to Anthony and Daniela: how are the students that are involved selected or legitimized? What would be your ideal regarding this? And try to keep it short, because I know you addressed this already for several times in your sessions.
I think Anthony should start answering this question. As the expert between the two of us.
I think this is a good follow-up question from the previous discussion we had, from the last question. So the question of legitimization has been, of course, a debate in the Student Forum for the past months. And the very basis of that discussion has always been that we as student members of YUFE feel much more than mere representatives or mere participators in the network. So as co-creators, we have a much more intensive involvement than a student representative might have. And this is the basis for our discussion between, do we want an election, democratic election within the local student bodies, or a selection procedure? And right now we are mostly in favor of a selection procedure, which we try not to make elitist in any way. So that means that a staff member will be included, an executive maybe, but definitely the students that are involved from the universities will also have a say, and will also coordinate the selection procedure together with staff. And I think, well, our priority, of course, is to have students involved that are capable, but mostly are willing and very enthusiastic to contribute to this wonderful project that we are allowed to implement. And for that, we developed some selection criteria, which are to be communicated very transparently to the student bodies of the universities. But I think these criteria, of course, would depend on the kind of expectations, on the kind of project that you, with your European university, would have. So I think it's indeed important to have this discussion with the students and with staff, with everyone involved, and try to specify as much as possible what you would expect from those students if they were to be involved.
If I can add to what Anthony said, it's key to define the role of the students, like the role of the staff, in order to say what would be the most suitable way to select or elect them. And if their role, like in YUFE, is very substantial, Morgan was rightfully pointing out the fact that being involved in the work packages, in the key developments, like our student members are, requires also time and requires guidance, support. So this all has to be taken into account. When you want to make your students interested and have them engaged and then involved in the initiative, you have to be very clear about what their role is going to be, what is this opportunity going to offer them, and how they're going to be supported, both in terms of skills development as well as financially. So these are all factors that play a role also in the way we define the selection or election of our student members.
Thank you. And because I'm also following the time because we need to finish the webinar by 3:30. So to the participants, please do not add any more questions on the platform, and we will be going according to the likes. So the questions that that are top questions, we will try to address them at least by the speakers. Then we go to the next question, which is to Nina. Do you see big differences in the level and ways of student involvement among the 17 alliances?
Yeah, I think it's funny how all the questions are really around this whole theme of like also legitimization of how you involve your students, and that's also something that we as ESO have been discussing a lot. Like, what's the best way? How should you do this? Do we have to find a uniform way? Yes or no? But no, I don't think so. But yes, you should find the right ways to be able to legitimize how you involve your students. And then when we look at the alliances now and also the alliances that are in the process, we see a big difference. Like some like already the whole government structures of the alliances are very different, as you've seen in the two examples that were given. So we see a difference in like when students were involved already from the beginning, yes or no. We see a difference in what kind of students are involved. Is it students coming from student unions, or is it just students that have been selected or appointed, or maybe have been maybe there was an email sent out to all the students if you were interested in joining this project. So there's many ways that students have been approached to join. We see alliances where there's just a limited number of students being very much involved in the whole process, but there's also universities that have like a student platform where a lot of students are kind of like separately giving their opinion on how the proposal is developing. So there's many different ways, but again, what we say is like, doesn't matter how you do it, as long as there is students involved in the official decision making, and ideally working towards some kind of official representation with some kind of democratically elected or legitimized way of student involvement. But maybe Gohar also wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. There is a huge difference between how the universities are involving students so far, and some are not even involving. So I think this is one of the most important parts to address, that in some cases we see that there is no involvement, and this is exactly the reason why we are doing this type of promotion of ideas, because also when we speak with the university leaders or staff members, they're like, yeah, but like, how can we do it? Like, we don't know how to work with it. So this is why we have you all here, especially from YUFE and Europa, to spread how you're doing it already, so the others can also know it.
Could I add something to what Nina was pointing out? Something that we also emphasize with all and among our staff and students is that we are all ambassadors. We have had the huge privilege to be involved in this initiative. And it's really important that we share with our colleagues, our peers, what is happening, and that we listen to what they have to say and even signal if they are interested in playing a role. So student representation should be organized, structured, but it should really go beyond the official key processes, because there might be students that will not be involved in an official body, will not be the official student, a member of a strategy board or a student forum, but have skills, have ideas, and they should be equally heard And there is no better way to do this if not via our student members and our staff, but we all have this duty.
Thank you. Then we move to the next question, which got pretty popular now, to Elena. What is your vision for those universities not included in the European alliances? How do you see Erasmus' future in light of development of alliances to preserve the current system of mobility?
Yes. Thanks, Gohar, for the question. So we all know that European universities will not cover all existing higher education institutions in Europe. We have a limited budget there. However, and this was one of the main principles that was identified from the very beginning, was for those European universities to become actually role models for all other higher education institutions in Europe, be it in terms of breaking down the barriers to mobility, such as recognition, such as funding, accommodation, etc., etc. And I would say that in terms of students' involvement, this will be the same. This is why during my introduction, I really pointed out that in addition of disseminating these good practices on how universities are involving their students within their alliances, so in addition to sharing those good practices among the existing alliances, we would really like to see a dissemination effort going beyond the universities that are part already of these alliances, but they are spilling over to higher education institutions that are not part of the European universities. So the idea would really be for the current alliances to become pioneers in facilitating mobility flows, but also in involving the students at the decision-making level, in the curricula development, etc.
Thank you for the response. Then we move to our next question, which is addressed to either me or to Nina, about the university alliances, about the fact that university alliances work in different university governance models, and they have different traditions in student involvement and governing bodies. Is this an issue? Like, this is, in general, the difference of governance models is an issue for the universities which are within university alliances. I very well remember that this was being very much discussed during the last consultation meeting in February that was organized for many different stakeholders. So the governance model is a challenge, but I'm pretty sure that it is not a challenge that cannot be really overcome. So we just need to sit and think about it and prioritize the fact that, yeah, we need to discuss how to shape student engagement when we have very different governing student involvement models in our universities' governing bodies. And I'm pretty sure it is a solvable challenge. So yeah, it is an issue, but we can solve it, I'm sure. Nina, do you want to add anything, or? Okay.
No, I think you gave a very good answer to that.
Okay, then we move to the next question, which is, do you know how many alliances have already a formal structure to ensure student involvement? Example, at Arcus, students have voting rights in the steering committee. Elena, do you think you have anything about this from the monitoring, or is it?
Yes, we don't have currently the exact numbers because we are doing a mapping for the moment of alliances where formal involvement of students is taking place. But from what we have seen, I think that at the beginning we had a very few, but now as we are progressing and as European universities have kicked off their first activities in the past months, this is something that is becoming more and more the case in within the alliances. But for the exact numbers, I would not be able to tell it to give it to you today, because the mapping is ongoing.
Thank you. I will just add very briefly that last year in October, together with Nina, we were doing a short survey among the student bodies of European University Alliances. And our survey really showed that there were indeed like very few alliances where there was actual student body existing. I think it wasn't anything more than 4 or 5 universities. So it would mean that those were the only ones where students were involved kind of from the very beginning almost.
And this is also, oh, sorry, Gohar, but this is also why in my presentation I really highlighted these 2 phases. Like, even if your student involvement in this first phase is a bit like messy, loose, maybe some individual students, then still in the process you can really work towards establishing official student involvement. And for that also, of course, you have quite a period of time, but try to also make that a part of the plan.
Yeah, exactly. And we will be focusing on this in the upcoming period for sure. Then we go to the next question, which is to YUFE. What formal role has the student forum in the governance architecture, consultative role on the proposals of strategic board, veto rights on student issues, etc.? So very like practical examples if you can give.
Yes, so if I may, so as Daniela pointed out, we are embedded in the governance structure, first of all, as student forum as such, and the student forum, whose role is still in development or still to be defined very specifically, is an advisory body for the working packages, but also for the strategy board and the management team, for those matters that are very relevant from a student perspective on those matters. But besides that, within, to give a concrete example, within the strategy board, where we are with 2 students, the president and the vice president, I myself as president am co-chairing the student strategy board, the strategy board of YUFE. And this means that I get together with the chair of the alliance, Professor Martin Paul, as Daniela said, to prepare the strategy board agenda together and also to chair them together. So this means that we are consulted on all levels, also levels that might seem less relevant from a student perspective, for example, on matters concerning research or staff. So I guess that is my answer, that we are involved at all levels, and I think that is very important. As Daniela said, and I said, we have a student's voting power on the strategy board, and one of the very key features of the strategy board and of the alliance is that there is a consensus model, which is, I think, very important for the members. So this means if we as strategy board members, as students, don't feel at all comfortable with any decision, there is no consensus. So I think there will be this very trustworthy environment that the decision will not be taken if the students are not behind it. And finally, I think maybe the most important part of student involvement goes even beyond these formal structures of student participation. See that students are in YUFE in all meetings, in all bodies, but even more they are involved as, or recognized as students who can provide a real valuable contribution. I think that is a key power of YUFE, that we can realize that, and I think all students feel comfortable in contributing to YUFE in that manner.
Thank you. Thanks. Oh, yes, Daniela?
I think that Anthony has given the same answer I would have given, and there is one aspect that we really want to stress. As young universities for the future of Europe, we really believe that we can build and be the blueprint for an ecosystem where cooperation comes before competition. Actually, where we guarantee excellence based on inclusion. And in this context, what we do is really try to listen to each other, understand each other's perspective, and come to proposals and solutions that take into account all points of view. This is much more laborious, takes more time probably.
Matteo, Nina?
Is not the most time efficient, but we have decided to work by consensus because this is the only way to really increase cohesion within the alliance from the point of view of the universities, of the students involved, of the staff involved. So like Anthony said, if we don't agree on something, we go back and work on it further. And this means that in our governance, there is no reason to have a veto on any proposal, nor for students, nor for staff. And this is a crucial point. So thanks to the colleague who brought up the question.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the answer. And I would propose that now we take the final question and then we close the webinar. And the final question is for Morgan. Did you discuss about the possibility of an upward convergence of student rights and conditions within the Alliance? Do you think it is a valuable discussion?
Oh, that's a really, really interesting question. Yes, within the Alliance, yes, we had this, we talked about this topic several times during our main launch event in the end of January. So yes, the question now is how to be sure that the student conditions and rights are preserved, because the alliance plans to have 50% of its new formations, which will be traveling formations. I mean, with the students going in several countries, the several countries of the Alliance. So we talked about the question of housing, how we could provide as Alliance housing for students who don't have resources, financial resources, and also the question of mobility. How could we maybe afford for them with which system of social funds or something like that. So we had those discussions. They're not finished, but we started to have them.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 12 other more questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to address these questions for today because we need to wrap up the webinar. But your questions, because I was scrolling through your questions on my phone, and indeed, like, there are some very, very important questions. We will try to address them in our further work and further cooperation with both the alliances, with YUFE and Una Europa, and also with the Commission and with our colleagues, Elena and also Oana, who is also in our webinar. Thank you all so very much for joining our session. Thank you to Daniela and Anthony from YUFE's side, and I'm pretty sure we're still going to have a lot of chances to meet together to discuss our cooperation, and we have already meeting plans.
Gohar,
yes.
Sorry, I see a comment right now. A colleague asks, it would be nice to have a booklet with good practices. What I can say, and Anthony can confirm this, is that for the future, our student forum is going to work on a good practice or YUFE practice on student involvement, how to build bottom-up European universities with a student-centered approach. So it's not something that will be ready tomorrow, right, Anthony? It will take still quite some work, but that's exactly one of the deliverables that we had not even included in the proposal. And we have just decided to work on.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for pointing out the remark from the chat, because I couldn't manage to see that. But yeah, definitely, this is also one of our future steps within the European Students' Union to work out the best practices of student engagement existing so far in the European University Alliances and somehow showcase them. And we're also planning and actively working with the colleagues from the European Commission on planning the further meetings for students from different European University Alliances, because we also believe that if we do not facilitate sharing of information between these student representatives, then we won't really go very far with the whole initiative. So that's definitely on our plan of work. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Elena and Oana. Thank you, Nina, for sharing your presentations. And thank you all for your active participation and for all the questions you were posting. We will follow up on your emails with the presentation and with the recording of the webinar. And for the students, if you will be happy to join our informal group on Facebook, please follow the link that you will find in the presentation. And for any ideas or cooperation or just sharing information that you will require, just feel free to reach out to us. Thank you all very much, and I hope that we will have other chances to meet in person where we will be allowed to, but otherwise we will always be happy to organize for you online events, just because it's so easy. Thank you.
Many thanks to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
And the great webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.